3 true night shift horror stories animated. Night shifts seem peaceful only to people who have never worked them. After midnight, the world changes. Streets empty, stores go quiet, and the few people who are still awake at that hour often behave in ways that feel unsettling. Anyone who has worked long enough during the night learns something important. Strange things tend to happen when most of the world is asleep. Sometimes it's just odd customers or nervous strangers, but sometimes the night reveals something much worse. Story 1. The Late Night Customer. A small 24-hour grocery store sat near the edge of a quiet town, right next to a highway that truck drivers used late at night. During the day, it was busy, but after midnight, the place was almost completely empty. Most nights, the only person inside was the cashier working the overnight shift. That summer, a 19-year-old named Daniel had started working there. He didn't mind the hours. The store was calm, the aisles were quiet, and he spent most of the shift restocking shelves while listening to music through one earbud. One night, around 1:30 in the morning, the entrance bell rang, and Daniel looked up from the register. A tall man had walked inside. The first thing Daniel noticed was that the man was wearing a thick winter coat, even though it was the middle of July. His hair looked damp, like he had been standing in the rain, and his eyes were wide and restless. The man walked straight to the counter and placed a single pack of gum down. Daniel scanned it and told him the price. The man didn't immediately reach for his wallet. Instead, he leaned slightly closer across the counter and quietly asked, "Are you working here alone tonight?" The question felt strange, but Daniel shrugged it off and said yes. The man nodded slowly, paid for the gum, and left. 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. The same man walked back into the store. This time, he wandered slowly through the aisles, not picking anything up, just looking around. Eventually, he returned to the counter and placed another pack of gum down. Daniel scanned it again. The man leaned closer just like before and asked the same question. "Still alone?" Daniel forced a small laugh and said yes again. The man paid and left. Now, Daniel felt uneasy. Something about the repeated question made him uncomfortable. About 20 minutes later, while Daniel was mopping near the entrance, the door suddenly opened again. But when he looked up, nobody walked in. The door simply opened and closed by itself. Confused, he stepped outside and looked across the parking lot. It was completely empty. The only sounds were distant cars passing on the highway. Daniel went back inside, assuming the sensor on the door had malfunctioned. Then, around 2:20, the bell rang once more. The same man stepped inside again, but now his coat looked dirtier and there was a dark stain on one sleeve. He walked straight up to the counter and stared at Daniel without placing anything down. Then he asked again, "Are you still alone?" Daniel hesitated before answering yes. The man smiled slowly. "Good," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked toward the hallway that led to the employee's storage room. Customers were not allowed back there. Daniel grabbed his phone and walked toward the hallway, calling out for the man. The storage room door was slightly open. When Daniel stepped inside, the room looked empty at first. Shelves of boxes lined the walls, and the fluorescent lights hummed softly. Then he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, the man was standing in the doorway. Up close, the stain on his coat clearly looked like blood. The man stepped forward slowly and said, "I just needed to make sure nobody else would hear you." Daniel panicked and shoved a metal cart toward him before running past him and sprinting to the manager's office. He locked the door and called the police. When officers arrived minutes later, the man was gone. They searched the building and found wet footprints leading to the back exit. Behind the store, in the dumpster, they discovered the body of a man wearing the same winter coat and with the same face as the customer who had been inside the store. According to the police report, the body had likely been dead for hours before Daniel ever saw the man walk through the door. Story 2. The gas station visitor. Marcus worked the night shift at a gas station far outside a small town along a quiet highway. The station stayed open all night, but after midnight it usually became silent and empty. Marcus spent most of his shift sitting behind the counter, watching the security cameras while trucks occasionally pulled in for fuel. One night, around 3 in the morning, a dark sedan slowly pulled into the lot and stopped near Pump 4. The engine stayed running for almost a full minute before the driver finally stepped out. It was a woman who looked extremely nervous. She kept glancing behind her car as if expecting someone to appear. She rushed inside and immediately asked Marcus if she could use the phone. He pointed to the landline on the counter. The woman dialed quickly and spoke in a shaky whisper. Marcus couldn't hear everything she said, but he clearly heard one sentence. "I think he followed me again." She told the person on the phone that she was at the gas station on Route 19 and asked them to come pick her up. When she hung up, she thanked Marcus and walked outside. Instead of getting back into her car, she ran around the side of the building. Marcus thought that was strange. 2 minutes later, a pickup truck pulled into the lot. A large man stepped out and walked into the station. He looked around quickly before asking Marcus if a woman had come inside. Marcus hesitated for a moment, but said yes. The man asked which direction she had gone. Marcus said he thought she left on the highway. The man stared at him for several seconds before nodding and leaving. The truck drove away down the road. Marcus stepped outside and walked behind the building, where he found the woman crouched near the dumpster. When she saw him, she asked nervously if the man was gone. Marcus told her yes and asked who the man was. She said it was her ex-boyfriend and that he had been following her all night. Marcus offered to let her stay inside until whoever she had called arrived. They walked back into the station together. When Marcus glanced at the phone, he noticed it was still hanging off the hook. He checked the call log out of curiosity. The number she had dialed wasn't real. It was just a random string of numbers that didn't connect to anything. Confused, Marcus asked who she had called earlier. The woman looked at him strangely and said she hadn't called anyone. Marcus insisted that he had watched her dial the number. The woman slowly shook her head and whispered, "I didn't say someone was following me. I said something was following me." At that moment, the lights outside flickered. Marcus looked through the window toward the parking lot. The pickup truck had returned, but the large man was no longer inside the vehicle. He was standing behind the woman's car, completely still, facing the building. Marcus turned back toward the woman, who was now staring at the same thing through the window. Her face had gone pale. In a trembling voice, she said, "That's not him." Story 3. The Closed Hospital Wing. Victor worked as a night security guard in a large hospital that was usually quiet after midnight. His job involved walking through the hallways, checking locked doors, and making sure no one entered restricted areas. One early morning around 4, he was patrolling the maternity wing when he suddenly heard the sound of a baby crying. At first, he thought nothing of it, but then he remembered something important. The entire maternity wing had been closed for renovation for nearly 2 weeks. There were no patients there. The crying echoed faintly down the hallway. Victor followed the sound until he reached a room at the end of the corridor where the door was slightly open. When he pushed it wider, the room looked empty. There were no cribs or medical equipment inside anymore, just an old hospital bed and bare walls. The crying continued, but now it sounded like it was coming from somewhere else. Victor slowly looked around the room before realizing the sound was coming from the closet. He opened the closet door carefully. Inside was a small baby carrier sitting on the floor. The crying stopped instantly the moment the door opened. Victor stared at the carrier in confusion. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, a nurse was standing in the doorway watching him. She looked pale and uneasy. She asked why he was inside that room. Victor pointed to the carrier and started to explain that he had heard a baby crying. But when he looked back inside the closet, the carrier was completely empty. The nurse stepped further into the room and quietly told Victor that he shouldn't be there. When Victor asked why, the nurse hesitated before telling him something disturbing. 3 years earlier, a newborn baby had disappeared from that exact room during the night. Despite a massive investigation, the child was never found. Some hospital staff believed someone had kidnapped the baby, but others believed something stranger had happened. Victor felt chills run through his body as he looked back toward the closet. The nurse whispered that sometimes workers on the night shift still heard crying coming from that wing. As soon as she finished speaking, the sound of a baby crying started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the closet. It was coming from directly behind Victor, even though the hallway outside the room was completely empty. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel and share your own scary night shift story in the comments. Maybe it'll be featured in the next video.